Jason's Birds by Coven YT 2950 and Legolin 3791. A Batman All Media Types fanfic, rated for teen and up audiences. With additional tags for fluff and angst, hurt comfort, emotional manipulation, past child abuse, hurt Tim Drake, hurt Dick Grayson, kidnapping, possessive Jason Todd, protective Jason Todd, Jason Todd has issues, Tim Drake needs a hug, good sibling Dick Grayson, protective Dick Grayson, protective Tim Drake, Damian Wayne is bad at feelings, possessive behavior, child neglect, good sibling Jason Todd, dark Jason Todd, hallucinations, cuddling and snuggling, angst with a happy ending, Bruce Wayne tries to be a good parent, Bruce Wayne is bad at feelings, Lazarus Pit mad Jason Todd, Jason Todd is bad at feelings, past abuse, Tim Drake and Damian Wayne bonding, Damian Wayne has a heart, Dick Grayson gets a hug, Tim Drake centric, implied/referenced rape non-con, Jason Todd centric, self-esteem issues, self-doubt, obsessive behavior, implied/referenced underage prostitution, past sexual abuse, magic, suicidal thoughts, suicide attempt, unreliable narrator, platonic possessive, platonic yandere. Summary. It should have just been another investigation for Tim, but now his family wants to kill him. It should be just another night for Jason, but somehow he got a broken bird and he might want more. Chapter 1. Tim. He really should have just stayed in bed tonight. It was a bad idea. Of course Tim knew it was. He might be a genius, but that didn't exactly make him the wisest. Despite most of the night having been dealing with minor gangs, the accumulation of these last months was doomed to get him eventually. All the kicks and punches from criminals, the stab wound in his shoulder still healing from his last meeting Joss 2 days ago, and as if he wasn't unlucky enough, his fight with Bane yesterday, who was as gentle as always, had every bone in his body screaming until now. In short, Tim felt like trash. Yes, that was usual for him in this line of work, but this time, it seemed somehow worse. There were bruises of different tones of purple, blue, and yellow all over his torso, and his right leg was still hurt, as if it had been broken without his knowledge. It definitely didn't help that he hadn't slept in the last 2 days either. God, Tim didn't even remember the last time he had ingested anything besides energy drinks, coffee, and the good old tea that was the only one Alfred would approve. But he couldn't stop. Not now. Was he obsessing? Well, yes, but that was what he did. It was his thing. He had been monitoring this unusual criminal activity for 2 months at Miller's Harbor. Not that criminal activity wasn't common there. The place was like a fair for illegal products for criminals, and besides, it was Red Hood's problem. His territory. But Tim was never really sane, so he had risked the brutal fury and possible death at the hands of Hood to find out what the hell was going on there. And to do that, he entered the harbor to investigate a warehouse, which was the center of the criminal movement. It didn't matter how tired or hurt he was. This was his chance. He was well aware that it was reckless, even a bit stupid, but he wasn't dumb at all. He would only collect information and pass it to Oracle, then Hood could solve it on his own, and hopefully not find out how she got it and kill him. Tim also made sure to prepare a message with all the information he had, and his location for the others, in case something happened to him. Not that any of them would actually care about his disappearance, but they would come for what caused it. That was the plan, at least. Because somehow, Tim ended up crouched down in a thin steel beam between 2 others, only fitting there because of his height. Being small wasn't that bad at the moment. Steph and Cass would never know about his admission. He wouldn't survive their teasing. He was barely investigating the shipments inside the warehouse when Penguin arrived. He hadn't had time to get out, not without the mob boss seeing him. At least he figured out who was responsible for it. But now, Tim was right above Penguin and Freeze. The latter had arrived a few minutes after the other, and was negotiating the shipments with Penguin. He was recording everything for the last 20 minutes. hearing both bad guys mostly threatening each other until they finally said something useful. Apparently, there was a third negotiator, and they weren't really happy about them being late. Tim was screwed. Don't get him wrong. Finding out who that person or creature was would be truly interesting. But that also meant another villain to kill him on sight. Great. Looking between Penguin and Freeze, he thought about the reasons both were there. They didn't normally work together. They didn't even deal with the same things, or were on the same threat level. Plus, they were more likely to kill each other. But if they were doing business, that meant they had something the other wanted. And so did the third negotiator. Who could that be? Damn. He would have to leave it to Hood. Tim observed things heat up, as Penguin continued to mock Freeze, who wasn't staying so cold anymore. Yeah, he made a bad pun, but he blamed the lack of sleep. However, he couldn't stay there. One look at the ceiling and he would be found out. He had already risked too much until now, and he wasn't in a good state for a fight. He was feeling fatigue and dizziness, maybe because he was on stage 4 already, which meant the next stage was hallucination. Shit. After this, he would make sure to sleep at least 6 hours in his cold apartment. Torture, but better than seeing his dead best friend around. Tim put the recorder and camera on the steel beam he was perched on, connecting them to Oracle's network to activate them when he left the warehouse. He wouldn't like to get scolded right now. Carefully grabbing the closest steel beam and passing to the other side, he glanced down to check if anyone saw him, but it wasn't the case. Yet. Tim continued to pass from beam to beam, using the movements Dick taught him and smiling bitterly. He missed those old days. At least back then, he had the delusion that they truly cared about him. It was fine they didn't. He was truly unbearable, and they had bigger concerns. They had each other, and Tim could never get in the middle of it just because he was selfish. He snapped out of his thoughts when he was just a few meters from the window. But the next beam he grabbed, which was rusty, broke from the base in a matter of seconds. Ah, shit. Tim gasped as he fell towards the ground, having a few seconds to shoot his grapple gun and prevent himself from hitting the floor, only by a few inches. That was close, he thought, in relief and tiredness when he looked at the ceiling, not wanting to live through that experience Damien had caused him again. But then when Penguin, Freeze, and their henchmen entered his line of sight, Tim truly realized what had happened. Hey guys, sorry to interrupt you, but you can continue without me. I'm on my way, he said with a clumsy smirk and released the cable that held him, entering a fighting position. But before he could act, Penguin used his umbrella to shoot a projectile right towards his hurt shoulder. Tim tried to deflect, but he was too slow. His body didn't respond to his mind as quickly. He could only growl in pain when his stitches reopened and he lost his balance for a moment, enough for Freeze to get too close. Things were going wrong too fast, even for his standards. Tim struggled to give a sidekick to Freeze's arm, preventing him from using his freeze gun, then kicking his stomach. But he was too sloppy, and he didn't hear the figure approaching him from behind until it was too late, and a gas bomb hit the ground near him. He held his breath and tried to reach for his gas mask, but his distraction gave Freeze enough time to get his gun back and shoot him, causing his body to freeze from the neck down. No. He felt the lack of oxygen start to hit him as the seconds passed, not being able to hold his breath as long as normally because of his fatigue. No. Tim gasped, and the gas immediately entering through his nose and mouth, and making him realize something as the panic and fear infiltrated his mind. It was the fear gas. Scarecrow was the third negotiator, but he didn't have time to totally feel the effects, because he heard Penguin's mocking voice getting closer. Look what we got here. Before his consciousness went black, a last thought crossed his mind. Why was Scarecrow the third negotiator? Tim started to slowly wake up, instantly regretting it. Damn it, it was cold. He trembled and shivered, rolling to the side and trying to move his hands, but realizing they were tied behind his back. Awesome! Tim growled and opened his eyes, feeling a numb pain through his body and remembering what had happened. The warehouse, the villains, his fall, the fear gas. Oh shit. He controlled his breath and looked around, trying to not enter in panic. It was okay. He could make it. Tim reached out for the antidotes in the back of his belt, feeling that one had broken and struggling against the bonds to find another as he looked around, waiting for the moment the hallucinations would begin. He didn't want to see his worst fears, to sense what it was like to have his family treating him like he deserved, and doing what he knew all that time they wanted to do. It was a recurrent nightmare in the last months, and he just couldn't. Finally, Tim was able to grab the other. That luckily wasn't broken like the first one, and reminding one of the first lessons Bruce taught him. Always carry 2 antidotes. He squirmed his body to the side, clenching his teeth because of how his wrist burned from the bonds scratching his skin, but not giving up until he injected the antidote into his arm. "Ugh," Tim grunted, but sighed in relief and rested his forehead on the freezing metal ground, taking some seconds to recover. That was close. He lifted his head and looked around, analyzing the environment. He was in a cage, that was obvious, but it was clearly a frozen metal cage with a layer of ice under all the surfaces, including below him, which meant that from the 3 villains, Freeze got him, and he was probably in his lab. He didn't know how they decided which of them would have him, but he was glad that it wasn't Scarecrow, but a bit offended that it wasn't Penguin. Though now, Tim had to focus on getting out of there, because apparently passing out didn't count as sleeping, and his body still felt like shit, even when he barely could feel anything but cold. That was worrying. He would have to find out why the 3 were negotiating later, but before he could think of anything, he heard the noise of gunshots, gasping and breathing hard. There were 3 possibilities. First, another criminal or villain was attacking Freeze's lab. Second, the police broke into it. Third, the worst and better one, Hood was there. There was only one vigilante that used guns in Gotham, and Freeze's lab was also in Hood's area, so that possibility was starting to get more real. The gunshots got louder and louder, causing Tim to drag himself to the corner of the cage and try to get rid of the bonds again, but they were too tight and he was too weak to break them. Giving up for now, he observed through the bars. It was dark in the room the cage was, and he was barely able to see himself and some boxes outside of it, but he still prepared himself for all the possibilities. If it was really Hood, it was either possible that he would get beaten and then killed, or get beaten and delivered to Bruce. He didn't like any of the options, but he preferred to stay alive. Today. Soon he would find out, because suddenly the gunshot noises stopped. He heard steps getting closer to his position. Clenching his teeth and rising, Tim ignored the blood dripping from his shoulder, and his pain as he stood in a fighting position. Or the best way he could with his arms behind his back. "A replacement." A cold, mechanized voice greeted him before Hood appeared in front of the bars, his 2 guns in his hands. "Well, shit." "Hood!" Tim greeted him back, trying to act calm, but swallowing when he remembered that day in Titan's Tower. "You seem to be stuck in that cage, little bird. Do you want a hand?" Hood asked mockingly, leaning on the bars. Tim could have said yes, because of course he needed help. But there was something off about Hood, something that made his heart beat faster and his instincts tell him to run away. More than normal. "No, I'm fine. You can leave," Tim said acidically, shrinking but not backing away when Hood started laughing and then suddenly hit the bars with his fist. "Batman told me it wouldn't be that easy to get rid of you, but if it was, then where would the fun of it be?" Hood questioned rhetorically, causing Tim's brain to freeze. No, it couldn't be real. It was just a nightmare. "What?" he asked in sheer shock. "Oh, come on. Aren't you a genius, replacement? You should have seen it coming." Hood sneered and tilted his head, and he could imagine the smirk on his face even though he couldn't see it as the vigilante continued. "I'm here to kill you, Timbo. This time for real," Hood declared, and giggled cruelly, putting one of his guns in its holster and taking a key from his pocket. He started to open the cage, as Tim felt like his head was underwater. It was happening. His family finally got tired of him and decided to kill him off. Tim always relied on the fact that he was useful. He could not be loved, not be a true part of the family, not when he forced his way into it. He was just a stand-in for Bruce. And that was okay. He always knew that, and he already had a family. Didn't matter how bad Janet hit him or Jack ignored him. But he was useful. Not enough for them to want him around for too long. Not even as Robin, but he still brought something to the table. He was intelligent and did his job well, both in Wayne Enterprises and as Red Robin. He also saved Bruce when nobody believed in him. Of course, after he came back, Bruce almost never talked to him and didn't invite him for anything. Dick did all of that before, but after that day he gave Robin to Damien. He was too busy with the brat kid, so it made sense that he stopped after everything. Tim got it. He truly did. Dick was the first Robin. That mantle was his first, which meant that he had the right to take it away from him and give it to someone that would do the job better. It hurt, but it was reality. Looking back, Tim realized he should have expected it. The weight of reality finally hit him when Hood entered the cage. "You don't have to do that, Jason. Please." Tim wasn't one for begging, but he felt the despair and fear start to crumble into his heart as his nightmare became true. "No. Oh no, I have to, replacement. Dad Bats asked me to do so. And anyway, I wanted to. I just can't lose that opportunity," Hood said and shrugged, approaching him. "Now come here, little bird. Let's play." No. Tim wouldn't go down without a fight. He wouldn't, even for his family. "No, stay away from me. Don't," he shouted, and kicked Hood's hand away with the gun, then hit the palm of his feet in his chest, and throwing him on the bars before falling on his back on the ground. Tim growled when a twinge of pain came from his shoulder, ignoring it, and starting to get up. But he breathed quickly, and felt the panic infiltrate his mind when Hood recovered from his shock. "You little shit," Hood cursed, fury dripping from his voice. Tim didn't know what happened to him, but he lost his balance and fell on his butt, trying to kick Hood again, but missing his face. "Stop, Jason! No, please!" Tim begged, and struggled to drag himself from the wall on his belly, away from Hood. But he was stopped by a hand holding his ankle, trying to kick Hood again, with his other leg, but it was useless. And then he heard it before he felt it. The crack of a bone breaking. His right leg. "Fuck!" He screamed in agony, clenching his teeth, his vision turning white for a moment, and black spots appearing after it. That was it. He would die there. His death ordered by his own family. Tim would die in the hands of his Robin, his brother, because it didn't matter what the pit turned him into or how much he hurt him. Jason would always be it for him. He didn't have time to try anything else, because then Hood held his hair and pushed his head to the side, causing him to moan in pain. "Night-night, Timbo." Hood chuckled mockingly. It was the last thing he heard before he felt a needle pierce his neck, his consciousness being swallowed by the dark soon after. Chapter 2. Jason. He sighed and ignored the sounds of bullets hitting the concrete as he reloaded his guns. Not in the mood for it at all. Fucking Penguin. Just because he put Black Mask in a hospital bed for a few weeks, Birdbrain had to take the opportunity to do his business on his turf. If it wasn't for Bat's stupid rule, and Jason's consideration for peace with him, he would have already put a bullet in the asshole's head. He had furtively approached the big warehouse, quickly neutralizing Penguin's henchmen outside and entering it. But just when things were too good to be true, the universe came back to fuck him up. It was becoming fucking routine already. Jason missed a shot when one of the idiots tried to stab him, which warned the others. And now here he was, standing behind a wall, with Penguin himself using his ridiculous umbrella and the rest of his henchmen to shoot at him. Awesome! He picked up one of his smoke bombs and threw it to the other side of the wall, smirking when he heard Birdbrain cursing as the bomb exploded, releasing a smoke screen. "My turn, motherfuckers!" Jason shouted and activated the thermal sight on his helmet. Walking inside the room, he shot the closest guy in the legs, giving a front kick to the one on his right, before shooting his shoulder and hitting his forehead with his gun. Jason easily took down the other suckers, then focused on Penguin, who was trying to escape through the back door. "Oh no, Birdbrain, I'm not done with you." He giggled darkly and shot his hand, causing him to drop his umbrella and groan in pain, but he kept running. Why did the villains seem to be more resilient than before? Jason pointed one of his guns at the back of Penguin's head. for one moment considering to just kill him right now, so he could go home and watch his favorite show. "Fucking hate you, old man." Jason scoffed tiredly, thinking about the ways he could piss Bruce off next time they saw each other, as he ran towards the short criminal. When he was close enough, Jason gave him a round kick to the back, which easily made Penguin stumble and fall flat on his face. "Ah, finally, some fun." He chuckled darkly and let Penguin try to sit up, deciding that some punches wouldn't make Batman mad. After all, he did worse. "Red Hood, I thought that I was finally free of you, annoying idiot." Penguin sneered and held his hurt hand, then smirked. "If you're here for the other one, you're late." "Other one? What the hell are you talking about, Birdbrain?" Jason asked impatiently, aiming one of his guns at the idiot to emphasize his question. "Oh, you've no idea." Penguin laughed arrogantly, staring at him. "Red Robin was here some hours ago. Now you can say he won't be coming back to Batman." "No. Hell no." Jason didn't care if Penguin was talking about his shitty replacement. He wouldn't let another Robin die. Not under his fucking watch. He was the only one that could kill any of them. He hit the side of his gun to Penguin's face and held him up by his suit collar, not giving a fuck about the blood dripping from Penguin's nose. "Where is he, Birdbrain?" Jason questioned pointedly, snarling when Penguin only smirked and said, "You let me go, and maybe you can get there in time." Okay. It would be the hard way. He gave Penguin a rough knee to the stomach and watched him toss and choke, holding his throat firmly and putting the muzzle of his gun to his forehead. "I think you're forgetting who I am, Penguin. I won't stop like Batman. No, no." Jason smiled like a madman under the helmet, letting Penguin see in his eyes that he wasn't bluffing. "If you don't answer, I'll simply put a bullet in your ugly face and find someone who can tell me where Red Robin is. I'm sure one of your henchmen will know something when they scream in pain." He saw the exact moment fear shone in the villain's eyes, the realization that he would truly kill him right there. Good. He liked it. "Now, where the fuck is Red Robin?" Jason growled, emphasizing every pause by hitting the gun's muzzle to Penguin's forehead. "All right, Hood, all right," Penguin said, causing him to take a step back and drop Birdbrain. But he pointed his second gun to him to make sure he didn't try anything. "Freeze has him. He's in a warehouse in Old Gotham. I can even give you the address if you desire." Penguin sneered, scorn dripping from his voice. "He better be there, Penguin, or I'll come for your fat ass," Jason threatened, his mechanical voice seeming colder. He got the address and kicked Penguin in his head, right after for fun, tying him up with his henchmen. Jason would rather see him bleeding to death, all of them, but this was enough to get by. For now. He called the police as he left the harbor, riding his motorcycle and typing the address on the search system. It wasn't that far away, but the situation was too familiar and he hated it. Damn Dad Bats. How useless can you be when it comes to stopping your fucking children from dying? Jason considered informing Dick, or even the Bat himself, but the communication lines were open and he didn't hear them talking about Red, or even checking on him. What the hell did he miss? Driving through the dark streets of Gotham, he passed by the cars and buildings as fast as he could, committing to getting there on time. It wasn't like he truly cared about Timbo, of course, but he wouldn't let him die either. Not today. Jason stopped his motorcycle in an alley in the back of the warehouse, saying a big "fuck you" to discretion and kicking the back door, which led him to one of the sections of Freeze's lab. He shot the first guy he saw in the stomach and pushed him to the side, crushing the other guy's head to the wall before shooting the two that tried to attack him from behind in their feet, kicking their faces and causing them to pass out. Jason passed through the sections, getting rid of Freeze's henchmen and releasing his fury on them. He wanted to make it hurt for someone, and he did. The idiots would leave with some concussions, broken ribs and bones, bullet holes, some internal and external hemorrhages. But they would be alive, and they should thank Batman's useless rule for that. Finally, he walked into Freeze, who immediately shot his freeze beam at him. Jason did a somersault to dodge it, rolling to the side when the blast came towards him and pointing his gun at Freeze. "You missed," Jason smirked and shot the hydrogen cylinder on his back, releasing the hydrogen and disorienting Freeze for a few seconds. This was his chance. Running towards him, Jason gave a butterfly round kick, breaking the glass dome on Freeze's head and knocking him to the ground. Ah, fuck. Too strong. He needed him awake to know where the hell Red was. Hey, piece of shit, wake up, he snarled, and harshly pushed Freeze back, stopping when he realized that the popsicle was truly passed out. Jason clenched his teeth and held his gun tightly, tempted to just crush Freeze's head with his foot right there. But then he caught a glimpse of a metal door at the end of the main section. Slowly approaching and grabbing the key that was beside it, he put it in his pocket and opened the door. Honestly, he didn't know if Gotham's villains were getting smarter or dumber, but when Jason entered the dark, cold room and saw it, he was sure that they were as cruel as usual. There was a great frozen metal cage in the middle of the room, with some boxes around it. The light of the lab coming through the open door reflected on the ice layer, and as he walked up on it, Jason immediately identified the skinny figure inside the cage. Tim Drake, aka Replacement, or Red Robin, the fucking little genius who couldn't even take care of himself. He was in a fighting position, but his hands were tied behind his back, and he was trembling in the corner of the cage, a great amount of blood scattered on the ground. Jason growled, and truly wished that he had put Penguin and Freeze's asses in a hospital bed for at least a few months. Or rather, in the grave. It seemed that it would be up to him to act like the big brother. Fuck Dickie for not being around. Hey, Replacement! He greeted the little bastard, pretending that he was bored and not even a bit worried. After all, Jason had a reputation to live up to. Hood? Tim said, his voice shaking, as he looked at him with big, frightened eyes. Okay, that wasn't normal. The last time he saw Timbo like that was when he attacked him in Titan's Tower. And even then, he was a pretty resilient bastard. Something was fucking wrong. You seem to be stuck in that cage, little bird. Do you want a hand? Jason asked humorously, trying to act cool for once with the Replacement. Being kidnapped and almost frozen was already enough trauma for the night. No, I'm fine. You can leave, Tim answered, shaking and seeming too close to crying. What? What the hell, Replacement? You're not fine. You look like shit. Jason scoffed, and was about to tell him to cut the bullshit when he saw it. 2 bottles of fear gas antidote that Batman always made them carry. One broken, the other empty. Oh shit. Jason then looked between them and Tim, analyzing him better but not seeing any physical evidence that he was still under the influence of the fear gas. His eyes weren't glazed, and there was no sign of scratches or that he hurt himself. But the last 2 could have been because his hands were tied. There was only the blood that created the stain on his uniform in the shoulder area, but he couldn't have done that to himself. Could he? No, stay away, Hood. Please, please don't kill me. Tim begged when Jason stepped closer to the bars, clearly in panic as he breathed quickly. Yeah, it could only be the fucking fear gas. Jason ignored his feelings about what Timbo said, and started to think. It was probably a new strain that they didn't have an antidote for yet. That was why the one Tim had didn't work, which meant his antidotes wouldn't work either. It certainly wasn't like most of the others. There was no instant madness or suicidal acts, or Tim would be hitting his head on that wall until he died. That only left hallucinations. It just made this new version more dangerous, because he couldn't identify what exactly was happening to him. But what made his blood boil was the fact that the shitty scarecrow tested it on his little brother. Yeah, his damn little brother. But his. And Jason would make him regret it after he delivered Tim to Dad Bats. Okay, Timbo, I have to enter there. He spoke to him as softly as when he spoke to Hurt Mutts in Crime Alley. He slowly put his guns in their holsters, taking the key out of his pocket. It was ironic, because if Tim was a dog, he would surely be a pedigree. No, you're here to kill me. They sent you. Tim shouted desperately, making himself smaller against the cold metal, agitated as a cornered animal. Jason frowned as he opened the cage, taking the sedative in his pocket. He didn't like it, but there was no other way. Tim wouldn't listen to him. It wouldn't matter what he said or did. It would seem totally distorted to him. And it wasn't like this was the first time he sedated one of his siblings. "Come on, Timbo. Who do you think sent me? You know I take orders from no one. I'm here to save you," Jason said, trying to sound reassuring and approaching him carefully, but keeping an eye on his shoulder. The cold must have helped to decrease the blood loss, but it was still happening, and that wasn't cool. He knew that more than anyone. "No, you don't have to do that, Jason. I know Bruce, Dick, and Damien sent you to kill me, but you don't have to. Please," Tim whispered, his voice cracking. "Don't hurt me again." Jason felt it hit him like a punch in the gut, causing him to stop for a moment. Was that Tim's worst nightmare? That his own family wanted to kill him, and Jason was the chosen one for it. Fuck. He knew that he went too far that night. Of course he knew. He beat the shit out of the kid. He almost killed him, but Jason didn't think that Tim was still afraid of him. The thought of apologizing for that day didn't even cross his mind, not after the kid became an adult and stayed out of his way. But now his little brother's worst fear wasn't to be killed by any of the real nightmares that lived in Gotham, but by him. And apparently by the others too. The boy thought that they sent Jason, and he knew why he was part of it. But them? What the hell did they do to make it Tim's worst nightmare? Growling, Jason tried to control his confusion and anger, ignoring the twinge of pain in his heart when tears streamed down Tim's face as he walked towards him. "No, stay away from me! Don't!" Tim screamed and squirmed. The kick he gave Jason's hand took him by surprise, causing the sedative to be thrown to the ground. Before he could react, he felt Tim's feet hit his chest, pushing him away. "You little shit!" Jason grunted when his back hit the bars. His armor weakened the impact. He quickly recovered and grabbed the sedative again. He approached Tim, who stood up, clearly off balance, and fell on his butt. It would be funny if it wasn't worrying. Tim tried to kick Jason's face, but he dodged it easily, and watched his little brother drag himself, holding his left ankle to stop him. Jason just had to sedate him and deliver him to Bruce. Only that. He could figure out why that was Tim's worst fear after he tortured Scarecrow. He just had to put him down. "No, stop, Jason. Don't, I'll be good, I promise," Tim whined, with a useless attempt to use his other leg to hit him, but missed again and begged. "Tell him. I can be better. I know I can. Please, tell them, please." He didn't think that anything else that came from Tim's mouth would hurt him, but that did the job. His little brother was offering to be good so as not to be killed by Jason, who he thought was sent by his own family. That reminded him of when Bruce brought him to the mansion. He kept expecting the other shoe to drop, watching every sign that Batman was just another abuser, fearing the moment Bruce would get tired of him and kick him out. Jason knew how it was to be desperate to be good, to be the best Robin, because he needed to survive. He wanted to, and he wanted to continue to feel safe like he had for the first time in his shitty life. So when he looked at those frightened, teary eyes, he saw the boy that Joker killed and the pit buried. There was no way he was giving him back to Bruce, Dick, or the demon spawn. Jason suddenly felt a wave of protectiveness and possessiveness to take care of him. His thoughts swirled around his mind as a plan formed. "Sorry, little bird," Jason whispered and kicked the middle of Tim's right leg, using the exact amount of force necessary to cause a closed fracture. He closed his eyes for a moment and made a face at Tim's cry of pain, knowing it would be worth it. Releasing his left ankle and approaching his head, Jason heard Timbo crying. He gently held his head and pushed it to the side. "Nighty-night, little brother," he said, and injected the sedative into his neck, giving a little smile when the effects started to work on Tim, and his breath stabilized. "I'll take care of you, I swear," Jason promised, carefully putting Tim's body on his shoulder and leaving the cage. He didn't break his promises. Never. Chapter 3. Jason. He approached the great, deactivated industrial area in Crime Alley, which also had some old residential buildings. The streets weren't empty, like they never were in a place like that. Gangs, thugs, prostitutes, street rats, addicts. Crime Alley never slept, and neither did its people. That's why nothing ever passed by anyone here. But he didn't have to worry about any of them seeing him entering a building in that area. Half of them were protected by him, and would die before betraying him, while the other half were too afraid of him to open their fucking mouths to anyone. Even to Batman. Mainly to him. He guaranteed that. Jason glanced at the gang members smoking, watching them look away from him even though they certainly saw Tim's body on his shoulder. Smirking under his helmet, he entered one of the empty buildings, passing through it and heading to another one. During one of the few times his mom wasn't full of pills, she told him about some decades-old place that was full of the hard workers of Crime Alley, being the biggest industrial area of Gotham. But then the rich assholes that ran it moved to New Gotham with their money and companies, leaving the buildings unemployed and empty. Old and dusty buildings. Typical of those suckers. Now, it was like a fucking rusty labyrinth. 20 buildings of it. And only he knew which one of the buildings the upgraded bunker was under. Not even Dad Bats was aware of it. None of his trackers had gotten even close to it. He would never be so proud of anything as he was of the fact that he was capable of keeping one of his hidden places truly out of the Big Bat's radar. Entering the right building, an old factory that was like a labyrinth full of rooms, corridors, and stairs, Jason looked smugly at Timmy's motionless body, his fluffy hair falling on his pale face, whispering, "We're almost there, little brother. Hold on." He knew that Tim wouldn't react well when he woke up, but the sedative would give him 24 hours to fix the little bird's body, confront Bruce, and then find the sucker of a scarecrow. It was enough time to kill someone for hurting Timmers, which were all of his bragging rights and no one else's. Jason walked deeper into the building, soon seeing the reinforced lead doors of the upgraded bunker. It was never too much to be sure that even Soups couldn't find it too. He put his hand on the scanner, disguised as an electrical box, waiting for it to analyze his fingerprints. There was no entryway per se, but the lead doors still opened right into the bunker, a large spacious area with rooms scattered throughout. "Welcome to your new home, little bird," Jason said, and smiled. He patted Tim's back and watched the lights turn on as he entered the upgraded bunker. The only way in was through the part of the base where he kept his toys and other things for his night job. He stood in his large training room. It was filled with equipment that would make the most expensive gyms and prestigious martial arts schools look like child's play. Jason turned to the side, where the med room was, right by the entrance. Pushing its door open with his foot, he made a mental note to activate the biometric lock system of all the doors in this section. He couldn't have the little bird having ideas with his things. The light turned on automatically, and Jason was faced with the sophisticated first aid equipment he had stolen from Wayne's company, aka a few IVs, a scalpel, better bandages, and all kinds of good shit. There was a medical chair in the center of the room, with the first aid equipment scattered around it, in small mobile cabinets, and a metal stool beside it. Walking on the left side of the chair, Jason laid Tim on his side as carefully as he could. He took his military knife from his belt and cut the binding that tied Tim's hands, realizing that he should have done that before because of how the little bird's skin was even more hurt. "Come on, give me a break. I didn't exactly plan to kidnap my shitty replacement today," Jason grunted, and started to take off Tim's uniform, detaching the little hook fastenings and undoing buckles. He used his knife to cut what he could undo without hurting him, and avoided his right leg for obvious reasons. As he stripped Timbo until he was only in his underwear, Jason counted the bruises on Tim's torso, growling when he saw that the source of the blood was a stab wound on his shoulder. He felt that familiar, uncontrollable anger burning inside him during the whole process, the pit thirst for blood calling for him like it hadn't for a long time. And to make it worse, the little bird's body looked like shit, and it didn't even seem to be because of any of the recent injuries. Analyzing him, Jason arranged him to be on his back. Replacement was clearly neither eating nor sleeping enough, which wasn't truly new for him. The idiot practically lived off cups of coffee and work, but the visible ribcage and the horrible dark circles underneath his eyes made him seem as small as that day in Titan's Tower. Pathetic, for an adult and a vigilante. The fucking dumb idiot had to have the most brilliant brain he'd ever known since Batman's, but be completely useless when it came to using it for basic self-care. Classic for the Bat family. But that will be different from now on. I'll make sure of that, replacement. Jason snarled and turned, taking off his gloves and unlocking his helmet. He put them on the dresser. Sighing, he entered the bathroom and washed his hands, leaving it and grabbing the necessary aid equipment to fix Timbo. At least physically, because mentally it would be a hard time. Fucking Bruce and Dickface for forcing him to act like a big brother. He sat down on the stool, and as he started to take care of the stab wound, Jason realized that it had been a while since he had did it for anyone but himself. And honestly, it wasn't that terrible. He looked at his little brother's face, but not liking how fragile and vulnerable he seemed. He shouldn't be like that. Robins shouldn't look like that, because when they did, their wings were cut off, as his were. Finishing applying the antibiotic on the wound, Jason covered it with a small, waterproof bandage before moving to his right leg. It was bad, but it could have been worse if he hadn't held on. It probably would hurt like a bitch without the painkillers, and he could use that as a way to manipulate Timmy into doing what he wanted after he gave him the antidote for the toxin. Yeah, he knew it was cruel, but it wasn't like he could keep the little bird in pain for longer than needed. The boy would eventually give in. He wasn't that cruel. At least not with Tim anymore. Not that he was attached to him or any shit like that. He was just ensuring that there were no more dead robins. Just that. That didn't mean that when Jason finished with his leg and put the cast on, he resisted the sudden urge to comfort the unconscious bird by caressing Tim's hair. It was like caressing a puppy, even though he knew well that Timmers was a fucking adult. Fuck, he didn't act or look like one, but Jason wouldn't treat him like that either. He passed his fingers over Timbo's ribcage and ugly bruises, feeling tempted to press them just to show replacement what kind of shit he received for letting himself be hurt so bad, to show him what happened to robins that made mistakes and let villains catch them. But at the same time, he never wanted Tim to know what that was like. Jason started to think of a diet for his little brother as he carefully laid Tim's torso on his chest, letting his forehead rest on his shoulder as he put a normal bandage around his abdomen. It would take time for Tim to gain any weight. Luckily, that was something they had, at least until he found out what the hell was happening with the family. Jason moved Timbo back on the medical chair and got up, cleaning his mess and grabbing some med stuff and bandages. He put them in his pockets. He moved to put his arms underneath Tim's back and knees, carrying him like a bride out of the bedroom, walking past the doors to the operations room and the arsenal near it, which would be the shame of any arsenal of a military base if they ever saw it. Jason headed steadily towards the back. He ignored the door to the library for now. So what if he had a library as big as his armory in his secret underground base? Knowledge was a weapon, and everyone should remember that. Finally, he reached the reinforced steel doors that led to the living part of his bunker, Tim's actual new home. In the middle of it, there were two long and large sofas in a half-moon shape, with a small coffee table between them, and the newest models of a television and game console in front of them. To his right was a great kitchen, with stainless steel appliances and a large island separating it from the living area, and to his far left, the hallway to the bedrooms. He headed to the one in front of his, on the left side, entering it and looking around. It would get by. It was a wide space with a full-sized bed in the center of it, a bedside table on its left, and an armchair on the right. The dresser was pushed against the corner, to the right of the bathroom, the bottom drawer containing spare sheets and extra blankets if necessary. There wasn't much else furniture-wise, but it wasn't like Jason had people over on a regular basis. This was a place he could go if he needed, to stay down and safe for a few months, his safe haven. And it would now be Tim's, too. It didn't matter if he wanted it. After all, the boy never knew shit about what was good for him. If he did, he wouldn't have become Robin in the first place. Or continued to be one after Jason tortured and almost killed him. Stupid bird. Softly putting Tim on the bed, Jason took some of the sheets and blankets, arranging them under his head and on top of his little brother. He sat on the bed and took the med stuff from his pockets, using them to gently take care of Tim's wrists and bandage them after. Timmers would need it for what Jason had in store for him. He finished and observed the broken little bird. Timmy looked better than before, but it was his family that let him get to this state. Jason literally kidnapped the boy, and there was no sign of the big man yet. Dickie, or even the brat kid. No one came for Tim. No one saw how thin and sick he seemed to be without the injuries, or even if they didn't do anything about it. And that was worse. Scarecrow could wait, since Timmy wouldn't wake up for the next 23 hours. Jason had to find out what really happened before he followed through with his plan. And he knew how. Arriving at the mansion on his motorcycle, Jason left it at the entrance and entered through the front door. After all, it was 4 fucking a.m., and Batman, Robin, and Nightwing had come back 30 minutes ago, which meant Dick and Damian should be in their rooms, and Bruce in his office. Alfred was certainly enjoying one of the few moments of peace he had after patrol, like he well deserved. He steadily walked into the mansion, not wanting to alert anyone besides Bruce that he was there. He probably already knew about his presence. He always did. That was why he couldn't fucking understand it. Why the hell didn't he realize how shitty Tim looked? Or why wasn't he looking for him? It didn't make sense. Approaching Bruce's office, he tried to control his anger, and seem as casual as possible, which was harder than he thought. The will to punch the old man's face was greater than usual. "Jason." Bruce's voice echoed in his office, at the same time he entered it. His hands were in his pockets, when he smirked and looked at the bat. "Dad bats." Jason greeted cynically, hating how Bruce seemed with his normal clothes. It was so common. And there was nothing common about a maniac that collected kids and turned them into vigilantes. Even the League knew that. "Am I welcome here? Or will your new son try to kill me for your attention?" He questioned ascetically, sitting on the chair in front of the table and tilting his head. There was just something special about provoking the great Batman. "Damian is still learning, but you're always welcome here, son." Bruce answered calmly with a little smile. Learning? That kid was surely a descendant of the Demon's Head. But that didn't excuse how much of an asshole he was. Damian would have to get killed and resurrected to gain a pass for that. And still, he was trying to steal Jason's place as the Mad Robin. Fucking little bastard. "Really? That's interesting, Bruce, because Timbo said the same thing," Jason said suggestively, narrowing his eyes. "Without the son part, of course." For a moment, he thought that Bruce would have gotten the message. It wasn't easy to read the big man, but by the way he slightly furrowed his brows, he should have. But Batman always found a way to disappoint him. "Well, he's right, Jason," Bruce declared seriously, but patiently, causing him to make a face and clench his teeth. It could only be a shitty joke. "You can only be fucking kidding me," Jason scoffed and snarled. "Where the hell is Tim, Bruce?" "Probably in his apartment. Why do you want to know?" Bruce questioned, but looked away from him, to the papers on the table. As if when it came to Tim, he wasn't worth his attention. What the fuck? He felt the pit rage taking over him, making every single plan he had for the conversation disappear. "Probably? That word isn't even in your fucking vocabulary, Batman. You always know everything, don't you?" Jason sneered, leaning forward and facing Bruce with fury shining in his eyes. "Did you fucking check on him?" he questioned between clenched teeth, clearly referring to Tim. "Tim isn't a kid anymore, Jason. If you want to talk to him, you go look for him," Bruce answered boredly, still looking at the papers on his table. Oh no, he didn't. He fucking didn't. "Yeah, but differently from me, he is still your fucking child," Jason shouted and punched the table, not giving a shit about the crack he left on it. He accepted a long time ago that he wasn't that boy anymore, that he wasn't Bruce's son. But Tim, he still was. Bruce finally stared back at him, a stupid, worried look on his face. "Jay." He whispered his nickname softly, as if he hadn't ignored every single hint Jason had left him about Tim being in danger. That was enough. "No. Don't come with Jay." Jason snarled and closed his eyes for a moment, opening them with a cold look. "Since I came back, I'm your greatest failure. Your worst disappointment, I know," Jason admitted with a bitter smile, continuing before Bruce could say anything. "But I said no more Robin's dead. I gave you a fucking chance to change, Bruce, and you still missed it tonight. And now, he scoffed darkly, a manic smile on his face. I'm done with our deal. I'll be your greatest nightmare, Batman. I'm going to bathe the city in blood until you and all the villains have nothing but your miserable lives. Jason shouted, giggling mockingly at Bruce's shocked and suspicious face. I'll show you and everyone else, those pieces of shit, what pain and fear truly are. What losing everything you have feels like. Then, when I'm done, I'll kill each one of them. Penguin, Scarecrow, Joker. Jason stated and emphasized every name, hate and scorn dripping from his voice. I will take everyone you have from you. You'll die alone, rotting in this mansion, and there will be no one to cry for you. And guess what? You can't stop me unless you put me in that grave again, Daddy. He said the last word mockingly, breathing heavily. Jason felt that flame start to settle down inside him, temporarily satisfied with the image of blood and death that his mind projected. Bruce would pay for it. The villains would pay for it. Jason would show them what they got for hurting another Robin, for hurting what was his. Jason? I could hear you from Damien's room. Is everything okay here? Dick's voice took him out of his thoughts, causing him and Bruce to look at the first Robin, who was standing with crossed arms at the entrance of his office. Typical of the older brother. But where was he when Tim was being frozen, when he thought that his own family wanted him dead? It's okay, Dickie. We're fine. Jason snorted and stepped away from the table, a smirk on his face when Bruce nodded with a frown. Me and Dad Bats were just talking. And will you stay, Little Wing? You can leave in the morning. Dick offered with a bright grin and puppy dog eyes. Normally, that would be enough to make him stay. For Dickie. But then, Jason remembered the broken little bird in his hidden place. The frightened and desperate look in his eyes when he begged him to tell them that he would be good. There was no turning back. And after all, he would see Dickie soon. Him and Damien. Nah, Dickie, I'm a busy man. Maybe next time, Jason said and winked at him, turning and passing by Dick, just stopping for a moment. You should call your missing Robin, Batman. Someone could have put him in a cage, and they might have decided to keep him. He smugly glanced at Bruce before walking out, ignoring him and Dick calling his name. Jason would show Batman how to really take care of his Robins. Chapter 4. Tim. It hurt. That was the first thing Tim realized when he slowly woke up, his mind confused and disoriented, starting to lighten up with the pain. Penguin, Freeze, Scarecrow, Hood. Oh no. No. It had to have been a nightmare, one that seemed truly real, but it had to be. But his hopes were crushed when Tim blinked a few times, grunting and making a face, when he saw a different ceiling from his apartment. Yeah, it wasn't a nightmare. His right leg seemed to be on fire, and the wound in his shoulder throbbed, his bruises hurting in a numb pain. And still, the worst part was knowing that if the agony was real, then his family wanting to kill him was too. Fuck. Tim clenched his teeth and felt tears in his eyes, but they didn't have time to fall when he was driven out of his thoughts by a voice he knew well. You woke up sooner than I expected, Timbo. You always find a way to surprise me, Jason said humorously, and Tim turned his head to the right when he realized it came from there, more specifically from the figure sitting on the armchair less than a meter from him. Hood. It was his place. He had kidnapped him, and there could only be one reason for Tim to still be alive. Jason would torture him. No, not Jason. Not him again. Jason, Tim whispered in panic, and tried to move as far as possible from him, forgetting about his leg. The fear and despair that had distracted him disappeared when he did so, causing him to whine and close his eyes, his mind going white for a few seconds and his nerves burning. Shit. It hurt so much, as nothing he had ever experienced, and pain was literally part of his routine. It was like hours went by before he felt the point of a needle piercing his arm, gasping when the liquid was injected into him. Tim sighed as the pain slowly decreased enough for him to think straight again. When he was back to himself, the first thing he sensed was the warm hand on top of his chest, over the blanket, hearing a worried voice tell him to breathe. He tried to, breathing deeply and focusing on the other person's heartbeat, and it worked. But the moment he opened his eyes, reality hit him. It was Jason, leaning forward in the armchair, with an angry look on his face and the hand on his chest. "Damn it, replacement. What the hell were you thinking?" Jason snarled the question, seeming as furious as the day in the tower. He was fucked up, and this time there was no one to save him. You didn't kill me yet. Why?" Tim questioned hesitantly, even though he knew well the answer to the question. "I won't kill you, little bird. I saved your dumb ass," Jason explained, and he must have seen the disbelief in his face, because then he continued exasperatedly. "It was a new strain of the fear toxin, okay? That's why your antidote didn't work. So whatever you saw, it wasn't real." Oh, that made sense. Tim looked away from Jason, feeling as if a cold bucket was thrown on him. He should be relieved, and he was. But why? Why didn't he think about that possibility before? He should be a genius, under the influence of toxic gas or not. How could he have considered that Bruce or Dick would have done that? They could not love him, but they were more heroes than he could ever be. Bruce didn't kill, even for Jason. That was exactly why he didn't deserve them. He didn't belong here. Tim felt his insecurities take over him, become his worst nightmare. He really didn't deserve to be Robin. He never did. "Hey, Timmy, did you pay attention to what I fucking said? You're not on that shit anymore. I gave you the right antidote." Jason grunted, the hand that was on his chest grabbing his chin and making him face him again. That was when he realized it. If what he had seen and felt in the cage was caused by the fear toxin, then why was his leg broken? It could only have been Jason. "You broke my leg," Tim stated in a shaky tone, his eyes wide open in confusion as he stared at Jason. Why? He didn't ask, but the question whirled around in his mind. Tim knew that Jason hated him, and it was okay. He accepted that. It wasn't like anyone truly loved or cared about him. He would always be that lonely kid who couldn't keep people around. But if he really saved him, then what was that for? To make a point? For fun? Well, fuck, yeah. But I didn't have a choice, Timbo. Jason snorted and released his chin, shrugging. What? You didn't have a choice? What do you mean with that? Tim questioned, irritatedly, trying to move his arm, but realizing he couldn't. There were cuffs on his wrists, with chains connected to them, and they were bolted into the wall beside each side of the bed, ensuring he couldn't move his arms. How did he miss that? What are those for, Jason? Tim asked a bit hysterically, sensing the panic and despair infiltrating his mind again, breathing quickly. Shh, little brother, calm down, Jason whispered and put his hand over his ribcage, where Tim felt bandages. Was it a game? Was Jason taking care of him to torture him later? Did his older brother really hate him that much? When I tell you to calm down, you calm down, little brother, Jason ordered pointedly, and pressed his bruises, causing Tim to whimper, the pain clearing those thoughts from his mind for a moment. That was effective. Really not cool, but effective. Shit. Sorry, little bird. I'll explain to you. But you have to breathe for me, Jason said, almost softly, a frown on his face as he caressed his ribcage. Tim didn't know what the hell was happening, or why the other was acting so weird. There were too many options for it. But he needed answers, so he tried to do like Jason told him to. That's it, Timmers. Jason gave a little smile. Not mockingly like usual, but a real one. Something was wrong. Truly wrong. Will you tell me now? Tim questioned firmly, trying to stay calm after freaking out 2 times. One more, and he would think that he was losing the handle. But Jason always had that effect on him. At least since the tower. Yes. Jason rolled his eyes. As I would have said if you hadn't acted like a little bitch. I didn't have a choice because if I didn't do it, you would be back as Robin as soon as you woke up. Well, he was right, except for the Robin part. I'm not Robin, not anymore, he said with a frown. There was no way Jason didn't know about it. Actually, it was pretty ironic. The replacement was replaced, even though he was never more than a stand-in. Jason wouldn't ever be replaced. Yes, you are. Once a Robin, always a Robin, Timbo. Jason smiled bitterly. Tim disagreed. You can't be Robin if you never really owned it. But he didn't want to antagonize the person who could break his neck as easily as he broke his leg. That still doesn't explain why you did that, or why I'm here, chained, Tim declared, emphasizing the last word. But he swallowed when Jason smirked, and his hand moved from his ribcage to his throat, holding it firmly but surprisingly not suffocating him. I thought you were the genius of the family, little bird. Come on, think about it. Jason snorted and brought their faces closer, putting his other hand on his wounded shoulder and resting his knee beside his broken leg. The threat was clear. Tim wanted to push Jason, to fight him, but he was defenseless. No gadgets, no moves, only his mind. And still, there was only one option that came to it, one that made a shiver go up his spine. Torture? Tim asked, trying to keep his tone steady, but his voice broke at the end. No, Timmy. Jason laughed, as if he had said the stupidest thing, rolling his eyes. I'll take care of you from now on, little brother. That was unexpected. Illogical. What? Why? Tim questioned and frowned, not being able to process what Jason said. Take care of him? He was an adult, and Jason hated him. It didn't make sense. Yeah, I know you're not used to that. How shitty you look says it all. Jason made a face and snarled, as if Tim disgusted him. He probably did. He knew how bad he looked normally. It shouldn't be better now. But since Dad Bats is so useless when it comes to taking care of his fucking robins, I'm going to take his place, Jason stated angrily, scorn dripping from his voice when he mentioned Bruce. There were hundreds of questions passing through Tim's mind, but at that moment, only one seemed to matter. What do you mean, Jason? By taking his place? Tim asked hesitantly, feeling as if ice water was running through his veins. Because if it was what he thought it was, Tim had to stop it. He couldn't lose him again, not after just bringing him back. It didn't matter if Bruce never loved him or considered him his son. He couldn't let Jason kill him. Exactly what your brain suspects, Timmers. Jason smirked. Bruce's time is over. And you. Tim tried to struggle and move away when Jason turned his head to the side by the grip on his throat. But he wasn't able to do anything as Jason brought his mouth to his ear, his next words making his hair stand on end. You're my bird now, little brother, Jason whispered, and Tim didn't have time to react before he felt another needle pierce his neck. It was the third time already. Tim had never been so consecutively drugged in his life. I bet you haven't, Timmy. Just let it go. Jason giggled with a caress of Tim's hair. Oh, he said that out loud. For one moment, Tim thought that Jason sounded like the Robin, who he saw put a smile on Batman's face, back when his excited laughter echoed through the alleys of Gotham. Jason seemed like Tim thought he would be, if they had become brothers in another way. As the older brother he always wanted to have in him. Maybe he was imagining things because of the sedative, he thought as his consciousness faded into the darkness. Chapter 5. Jason. He caressed his little brother's hair as he observed him fall asleep. Tim's breathing growing more and more slow and steady, almost peaceful. And that wasn't a word Jason would normally use for Timmy, but the little bird seemed exactly like that. Fucking deceptive. Timbo was dangerous, slippery. That was what the chains were for. Tim could overwhelm him in a fight. He proved it many times. But it didn't matter if he was hurt and unable to even get up. He didn't take the entire League of Assassins down out of luck. Tim wasn't known as a fucking genius for nothing. And Jason wasn't as stupid as to not act over it. He knew well he sucked at being a big brother. He should probably retire from that, even after just starting. But Dickie was always better at it, and he failed. Like Bruce did. They failed Tim, as they did him. Jason wasn't lying to Timbo when he said that he would take Bruce's place, but he wouldn't kill the old man like the bird thought. Scoffing, Jason thought about how many times he wanted to do it, and tried to, never being truly that easy. It never was when it came to Dad Bats, but putting that idea in Tim's mind would make sure he didn't do anything stupid, as it was typical of him. After all, he was still a fucking Robin, and Robins were dumb birds always protecting their Batman, even at the cost of their own lives. He knew well how it felt. And that was why he had plans for Bruce. The old man would learn to earn his Robins again. All of them. Slowly getting away from Timmers, he looked at his right leg, sighing and crossing his arms. Fine, he had exaggerated a bit. After all, he could have just sprained his ankle. It would have been much less painful and probably not make Timmy freak out as much. But from his experience with all kinds of shitty injuries, that would only have taken a maximum of a month to heal, which was good enough for him to make his little brother go to his side, as it should be, but not for Tim to help him out with the other birds. That would take at least 3 months, and breaking Timbit's leg was the only way to keep him dependent on him for so long. He would make up for that. Someday. Putting the sedative in his pocket, Jason left the bedroom, knowing well that he couldn't inject that in Timbo again, or he would have an addiction problem on his hands. And fuck it, he wouldn't let it happen under his watch again. He wasn't a helpless, weak child anymore. He would have to change the sedatives for the painkillers and control the doses when the little bird woke up. That will be fun. Jason smirked as he walked towards his arsenal. But not as fun as that would be. The lights turned up when he entered his favorite room, heading straight to the guns, knives, and bombs section. Jason pressed his fingers over his favorite weapons, already thinking about which he would use on Birdbrain. One villain was already down. Now it was Penguin's time. He could really give Bruce a heart attack tonight. Jason smiled smugly when he armed himself and put on his helmet, breathing deeply. After that, he would surely have to avoid the mansion for a long time. Fuck, he would miss Alfred and his food. Slowly approaching his main target, Jason had a smirk on his face as he walked over to the corpses scattered around Penguin's club. The blue and red lights reflected on the blood puddles he stepped on, the flames on the furniture burning intensely. The sight of one of the bodies moving caused him to casually raise one of his guns, shooting the henchman in the head 3 times as he passed beside him. He laughed mockingly. "Is that all you have, Birdbrain? I would say I expected more, but I really didn't." Jason sneered and looked at Penguin, who was crawling on the floor less than a meter from the fancy golden chair that the pompous asshole called a throne. As if he was the king of anything. Ridiculous. "You will pay for this, Hood," Penguin snarled with difficulty, blood accumulating under him as he tried to go further from Jason, but his broken leg couldn't do much for him. Neither did the stab wounds, or his fractured ribs. Jason had fun with this one. "No shit," Jason said sarcastically, and approached Penguin, stepping on his left hand and crushing its bones. The scream of pain satisfied the pit for a moment, causing him to smile maniacally when he did the same with Penguin's other hand. His cries sounded like music for his ears. Those hands hurt and killed so many innocents, including Timmers, and he was still walking around, just because Batman was too weak to finish the job. That would change. There wouldn't be one villain left in Gotham after he was done. Did it hurt?" Jason asked mockingly, crouching in front of Penguin's head and putting the muzzle of his gun under his chin, forcing the villain to look at him. "Well, you should have thought about that when you messed with my little brother, Birdbrain." Jason snarled and got up, kicking Penguin in his broken ribs and pushing his body in front of his chair. He ignored the villain's whimpers of pain, and the way his breath was unsteady. After all, it wouldn't matter in a few minutes. He would be dead anyway. "Brother? I didn't know you have one, Hood," Penguin scoffed, coughing blood, but still smiling in disgust. "If I did, I would have made sure he didn't live to tell you what I did to." He didn't have time to finish when Jason kicked his face, walking over his body and standing on his chair. He put his foot on his head and pressed it against the ground. He didn't stop until Penguin was screaming in agony, laughing when he aimed his gun at him. "You fucked up, Birdbrain, but it wasn't because you let Red Robin live." He unlocked his helmet and took it off, smirking as the realization settled on Penguin's face. "It was because you hurt him in the first place, and no one will ever hurt a Robin again." Jason shot him 5 times in the chest, watching the life leave his eyes with satisfaction. Looking at his watch, he realized it was time. He opened the communication lines and cleared his throat. "Dad Bats, did you like my surprise for you?" Jason questioned humorously, laying back on the chair and lazily opening his legs. "Jason, where's Tim?" Batman grunted, the sounds of ambulance and police cars, sirens in the background. "Yeah, he did. Jumbo is safe. Differently from how I found him, freezing his balls in a cage under the influence of that sucker's toxin. Jason growled angrily, holding his guns tightly but putting them in their holsters. He endured hours of agony until he ripped his eyes out, and had an overdose on his own toxin, Jason. You killed him. Batman snarled, and it only made the pit rage grow inside him. Really? He had just said that one of his sons was dying when he found him, and Bruce could only think about Scarecrow. He deserved the villains he had. And what will you do about it, bitch? Beat the shit out of me? Again? Jason questioned mockingly, continuing acidically. Or throw me in Arkham with that piece of shit of a clown, so he can finish the job for you? The silence took over the communication lines for a few moments, and he knew that he hit a deep wound. Great. Bruce deserved that for being a shitty dad. Bring Tim to me and we can solve this without any more deaths, Jason. Batman said calmly, causing him to laugh. Oh, you sound like Goldie, Dad Bats. Is he there? Brat kid too? Jason curiously asked, and licked his lips, putting his helmet on, but not turning on the modulator. He headed towards the exit. Damien is home, but I'm here, Little Wing. It's not too late. I talked to Bruce. If you give us the little bird back and stop, nothing will happen to you. He promised, Dick said in a worried, soft voice. Classic Dickie. But it wouldn't work this time. Now you give a shit, right, Dickie? Jason sneered, and left the club through the front door, where the rest of Penguin's henchmen's corpses were. I always did, Jay. All of us do. Dick stated, with so much certainty that it made him want to crush that. Really? So tell me, Goldie, when was the last time any of you had seen Timmy? Jason questioned pointedly, snarling as he walked towards his motorcycle in an alley at the end of the street. Huh? Tell me, Dickie, or I'm gonna break Tim's arm right now and force him to tell me. Jason snapped when his older brother didn't answer immediately. Of course he was bluffing. He wasn't even close to Timbo, but Dick didn't know that. 2 months ago, okay? The last time we saw Tim was 2 months ago. Little Wing. Dick shouted desperately, the pain and guilt clear in his voice. They were finally getting someplace. So, for 2 months you had no idea if he was hurt, sleeping, eating, drinking anything but coffee. No, you didn't, because you fucking abandoned him. Jason spat and rode his motorcycle, checking his watch and seeing that he only had 5 minutes. That's not fair with your brother, Jason. He was busy. We all were. And Tim is an adult. He doesn't need anyone to take care of him. He didn't want it, Bruce said, and if Jason didn't know any better, he would believe that the great Batman truly didn't know what he was doing. Really? That's funny, old man. Because then there's no reason for Timbo's worst nightmare to be you. Jason scoffed, and he could almost imagine Bruce and Dickie's faces right now. What? Dick asked, horrified. Oh yeah. When I came for him, the little bird thought you and Dad Bats and Demon Spawn had sent me to kill him. Isn't that shit stupid? Jason questioned sarcastically, wishing he could actually shove that in their faces in person. Soon. Fears and nightmares are irrational, Jason. Tim knows we would never do that. Batman said through clenched teeth. Keep trying to convince yourself, Bruce. Did he? I think you will only know for sure if you find and ask him. Jason sneered and turned his motorcycle on. But you won't have time for that, will you? Gotham always comes first. Unless you finally do what you have to. Jason, I will find you if you continue to do that, son. Batman snarled in a way that always meant he was talking seriously, which normally made everyone shiver and back down. But Jason wasn't everyone. Too late, Bruce, Jason said bitterly, because it had always been too late for what they had. I hope you like my second surprise. I made it special for you. Jason smirked and turned down the communication lines, taking the communicator off his ear and smashing it with his hand. So, a war would be. Leaving the alley and driving towards Crime Alley, Jason heard the explosion of the club, from afar. Batman would have some busy days, and in the meanwhile, Jason would build his new empire, with his family by his side this time. Hey, dear authors, if I mispronounce your usernames, please tell me. I probably won't go back and fix the first one, but it will be fixed in the next set of chapters, so. Gangs, thuds, Fuck. The idea of calling Bruce Wayne daddy, just ew, gross, thank you. I didn't need that, Jason. If you enjoyed this, there is a link in the description to the author's original work. You can leave them kudos and comments. If you have any fics that you would like to recommend to me, leave them in the comments and I will look into them. And thank you for listening.